There's a great quote out there. It's like, everything that's been invented has been invented, but it's not in focus yet. Think back, I wrote an article in the late 90s about the digitization of checks. Now, I know that's probably the most boring subject in the world, but in the late 90s, that was like Star Trek.
Welcome to Trade Treasury Payments, the podcast unlocking the future of cross-border finance.
From transaction banking and money movements
to liquidity, treasury, and cash management.
We bring you expert insights and the latest trends shaping global finance.
Hello and welcome to Trade Treasury Payments. I'm Carter Hoffman, Trade Technology Editor at TTP. Today I'm speaking with Alan Koenigsberg. He's the founder of Koenigsberg Insight and a longtime senior executive at companies like Visa and American Express. He's someone who's worked with banks, fintechs, and regulators around the world. And in this conversation, we're going to get into some of the big changes shaping Treasury and payments right now. So without any further ado, Alan, welcome to Trade Treasury Payments.
Thank you. Thank you, Carter.
Great to have you here with us. I know a lot of people in our audience will know you from your leadership at Visa and maybe even your current work now at Koenigsberg Insights. Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you're focused on right now?
I am founder of Koenigsberg Insights. I've spent the greater part of 3.5 decades at American Express, JP Morgan, at BofA Merrill, at Visa, and even at FinTech over the years. I'm having an incredibly diverse palette of jobs. And I consider myself one of the luckiest people in the industry that I've had an opportunity to grow up in operations and credit underwriting and customer service in one place, and then take that into product management in another and work internationally and all the rest of it. So my perspective often is a little bit more unique because I haven't been in the same discipline my entire career. Doesn't make anything better or worse. It's just a different eye, if you will, on the business. I've been in this business with various colleagues. I've met so many wonderful people in this business. I couldn't be more thankful, by the way, of the friendships and colleagueships that I've made over the years, probably goes in the hundreds. And these people that are in this business are lucky, and they're probably the smartest people around. The business continues to transform right before our eyes. I think the industry finally recognized that payments are sexy, if you will, and they're worth investing in. And post-financial crisis, when money was cheap and yields were being chased, a lot of money came into this industry. And I'm glad. I'm glad it's being modernized, not only on the rail side, but on the product packaging and on the sales side to treasurers, governments, and corporates, of course, alike. I'll stop there, but it is a pleasure to be with you. And I'm lucky to have the opportunity to often give my opinion. And the reason why I started Koenigsberg Insights was basically as a boutique to be able to share and pay it forward, if you will. There's the largest transition of IP and wealth going on right now in mankind between Gen X and Y and Z, if you think about it. As of this year, about 70% of the workforce is dominated by Gen Y and Gen Z. I think about when I got the keys to the car years ago, when a baby boomer generation person, they gave me the keys and said, go for it. I didn't have a lot of advice. And I think that's why issues in the industry repeat over and over again, because we have shorter memories. So advising companies, advising C-suite or senior executives on how to talk to this new generation of people, how to arm them with the right information and give them the histrionics so we can actually, as an industry, learn organically and take those learnings with us. I think that's one of the keys to risk management in the future that you won't find in any textbook. It comes from us, maybe with a little gray hair, paying it forward, transitioning that knowledge from one to another in a meaningful way.
And it sounds like from all your work, you've got a pretty big grasp of the big picture of the payments industry. And I know from reading some of your work, you've written a lot on the velocity of change in payments and treasury. So what do you think is accelerating things the most right now? And kind of the flip side of that, what's sort of being left behind?
You talk about the velocity of change, or you define change as stuff that you do to upset the status quo. The money that's coming into the industry does drive change. Some of it is chasing after profitability and yields. The whole fintech generation is a good example of some of the ideas have been brilliant ideas and some of the ideas haven't been. But that's okay. That's commercialism at its best. where good ideas often scale and basically can dominate the industry. And bankers and alike need to make room for those kind of players. Right now, if you read the headlines about our business, our industry, real time is taking up a lot of ink, as well as working capital and a couple of other key topics, digitization, et cetera. These are important, but they're not new. There's a great quote out there. It's like, everything that's been invented has been invented, but it's not in focus yet. Think back, I wrote an article in the late 90s about the digitization of checks. Now, I know that's probably the most boring subject in the world, but in the late 90s, that was like Star Trek. We had lockboxes and companies owned them. It was an expensive hustle to be paid. And just that one invention reduced fraud dramatically. It gave another presentment for an item, et cetera. But that tech had been around a long time before that. What drove it? The use case and the demand. So just because you have a good idea doesn't mean a customer, a consumer, or a small business or a mid-market, whatever company is going to adopt it. We all know what happened just after 2000, 2001. Customers didn't want to handle these items anymore. So the whole demand for digitization was made very, very clear by the end user and the customer. And that's how the acceleration happened. So you have to listen to the customer. You have to listen to what they want. Or as I love to say, you've got to be a geek about your client. You got to be really into what they do. And when you understand what they do, you can find the right suitable innovation, product, level of risk that they're willing to accept and that the right solution for what their challenge is.
So on that note of understanding your clients very well, you've written a lot of series in the past about taboo topics that a lot of clients or a lot of people might not want to talk about or say out loud. In your opinion, what's one uncomfortable truth in banking or payments that you think is still being ignored? And what should people be doing about it?
I think first to say the title of the article is a little headline grabbing. It wasn't meant to be, a stinging rebuke of anybody. I love this industry. And I would tell you, I very much enjoyed each one of those financial institutions that I was associated with, including during the Bank One JP Morgan merger. I learned from the best in the business. That said, banks are highly regulated, and they've been even more regulated after the financial crisis. It takes time for regulators and for congresspeople and for governments to catch up with ideas that are going on in the industry, which frustrates the industry, right? So if the fintech steps in and says, I want to make payments, they're going to find a bank that's going to sponsor them. Unfortunately, it may be to the ire of the banks that are losing business. But net, the pie continues to get bigger. You have to adapt and you have to change. I think about PayPal when it's in early days. For that, if you think about it, the last 20-something years, who would have thought a third party, other than a physical, like at the counter, Western Union kind of thing, would even be possible? And it became possible. It became possible for a really cool interface to step in and allow a consumer, a person, to make a payment to another person around the world, being facilitated by really intelligent software and cleared by a bank. So these things are important. I also would say the taboo part of two things. One is that it's not that bankers don't want to talk about it, but there's so much going on in this industry. It's worrisome, right? The level of change. You can't juggle 10 balls at the same time. You have to do it one bite at a time to eat that elephant. So pace yourself well, and you have to not look this way and this way, but you have to look forward to the industry, to the strategy of your institution and say, what's right for us? And often it may be a shift in the product mix. It may be you step back from a certain level of a product that's not profitable, retire it, outsource it, partner, and then migrate to something that is very profitable. And I think about certain banks that have done that over the years that have flourished as a result of it. So they've narrowed their focus. They've narrowed to commercial or narrowed to small business as a segment and done really, really well. Those are just two examples. Pricing as a banker, it's a taboo subject because we don't talk about pricing. Nobody's colluding, but nobody wants that with that it could be possible or true. But to talk about Greenwich, that bankers typically use as their mark-to-market Bible in terms of how others are performing their business and what customers think of them, pricing is very important. And it's not only P times V, which is the standard methodology for pricing, but our customers, those corporates that are out in the world, have developed fantastically strategic ways to charge their customers, dynamic pricing and all kinds of other techniques. We need to adopt those techniques because they're asking us to. And if we don't, they're going to find somebody who will. And so there's other issues at foot. So I think the moral of that story is we all have to listen better to the needs of our customers.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about AI. So I know obviously AI is a massive buzzword right now. You hear about it all the time when you go to conferences and all these reports and everything. Where do you see the most meaningful impact from AI in treasury and payments today? And how much of that do you see as being just hype that's going to fizzle out a little bit down the road? Where do you fall on the whole AI picture?
I'm not going to predict the future. I never have. I will tell you that change is inevitable, and there's going to be some fantastically amazing change, and there's going to be fantastically not amazing changes. AI and machine learning, because that's an important part of this, have been around for eons. When AI started to get a lot of momentum, I really loved Visa for this. I really enjoyed my time at that organization. They're just amazing people. And they put out, not a press release, but like almost a communique from the CEO at the time about AI's been with Visa for 35 years. And you scratch your head and say, no, couldn't be true. But Visa's been predicting behavior on the network from a machine learning perspective for a very long time. Predicting whether there be fraud, predicting whether this is out of pattern, risk management techniques, all of it is what they're sort of packaging into that, to your point, that buzzword. So if you think about it, AI, the next generation of artificial intelligence, is truly artificial intelligence, meaning it's thinking and it's telling you something you don't already know. Machine learning essentially has 6 algorithms. They're predictable, definable, and repeatable. Now, if you had a supercomputer, you could basically do the same thing yourself. You can ingest a lot of data. You can look at that customer from that perspective and try to predict what they're going to do next. It's likely going to be in pattern to their other behaviors. Example, a customer that always pays 30 days past due as a small business is likely to continue that behavior at a certain balance. And now the balance doubles and they go to 60 days. What do you think? Out of pattern. We've got to talk to that customer. That's not necessarily AI. That's just an out of pattern behavior. It's not predicting what's going to happen. It's just telling you what's happened. I think the future is really taking what will be called mundane tasks and not automating them, but making them meaningful to the operator, to the user, giving them additional intelligence and making their work lives much more productive. We've spent so many years, but how much time do we spend as organizations developing pretty PowerPoints? And no offense to Microsoft, it's a fabulous tool, but using some of the Microsoft products as an example are needed because we had nothing else to do, nothing else to really basically reflect on. So Excel, pivot tables, Microsoft PowerPoints, these take up a lot of energy. They burn a lot of calories. They take a lot of juniors or whatever to create. And they often look gorgeous and they do pitch decks. That's a perfect use of some of the earlier mundane sort of AI machine learning capabilities where it can look through a database. It can collate all this information, format it according to the company's policies on color palettes. It can give you that presentation so the company knows that what my salespeople take to the street is what I want them to take to the street versus something that is traced from the previous deck, which often made me crazy when I ran sales. But, you don't want the same deck out there to every single client. You want it to be bespoke and customized because relationship is everything. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. I think some of the newer generation of artificial intelligence, as we're calling it, truly is beginning to be artificial intelligence. It's not sentient, but it's thinking about how do I actually eliminate waste? How do I eliminate tasks and free up that individual? In some cases, reduce not headcount, but reduce the kind of roles that people needed to make a company more productive, to make them more competitive, and to make the end customer's experience better. That's a perfect use off the top of my head in AI for our industry.
Hey, enjoying this podcast? Hit that follow button for more. Done? Let's get back to it.
You mentioned before, kind of people in the industry, you got like 10 balls to juggle at a time. AI, of course, is one of them, but you also see things like shifting regulations, different non-bank competitors maybe coming into the market, changing things that way. Times it can feel like, everything's really just changing all at once. What do you think financial leaders need to prioritize most at this moment?
I often run into you and see you at different conferences, and sometimes I'm speaking, sometimes I'm not. But an often refrain and sort of used topic for a lot of these sessions is something versus something. The bank versus a fintech. Who's going to win out? Is banking dead? All these kinds of headline-grabbing material. That's not true, right? Again, I'm not going to predict the future, but financial institutions, at the very core of the relationship between them and their corporate customers, whether they be large or small, is often embedded in a credit relationship, that there's loyalty that's driven between the financial institution and that customer. And with that, post-Dodd-Frank, just other regulations, is the need for flow business for the bank. They need to balance out their ratios. And if they're honest enough to talk to their customers like that directly, they're going to say, I lend you money, not time, but lend you money. We need to identify opportunities where we can work with you further, where we can deepen our relationship. And often that comes in transaction banking. It's the perfect place to start. If you can actually perform at par or better, and you have a credit relationship, there's no reason why you can't be able to build on that relationship positively. So I think there's a lot to it. Fintechs, like I said earlier, as a result of money chasing yield when there were 0 to negative interest rates out there for so long, we're looking at the Treasury and wholesale business saying, look, this is a sleepy business, but it has a lot of upside and a lot of opportunity. And they're not wrong. This was a business that, in a way, was neglected, but it was sort of like the back office business. It wasn't necessarily the most exciting. I thought it was in its day, in early days, because I just was fascinated by wholesale banking. And not everyone was, but you have a lot of people, a lot of the industry that wants to understand it, that wants to develop around it. And that's why you've seen huge companies making acquisitions, like SAP's acquisition of Talia for working capital. And I could go on and on and on. Oracle has transformed their business vertically and horizontally around different acquisitions like Textura. It's amazing to me that ERP providers, large corporates, and others have married into, you call it the fintech segment. At the end of the day, these are companies like any other company. It's just that their product is similar to a bank's. So it isn't one versus another. It's how do you partner to get the best out of the market? Because at the end of the day, it isn't your choice. It's the customer's choice. So you can't ignore it away. You can't insult it away. You have to partner and really understand the voice of the customer and be able to act on that accordingly. And if you don't, it's at your peril.
So one last question. And I know you said a couple of times, you don't predict the future, but I'm going to ask you anyways. If we spoke again in 12 months, what do you think would be the biggest development in the payment space that's going to surprise people working in that space?
In the next 12 months, we're going to continue to accelerate, let's call it the renovation of the rails of the industry. You see big M&A happening. Big companies are beginning to pick what part of the ecosystem that they play in. And saw that ink on those stories just a couple of weeks ago. And I think that's fantastic. The age of conglomerates in one industry like manufacturing are over, and they were over 15 years ago. And now you're seeing that kind of activity now. So you can deepen, focus, and use the engine of some of these big companies, but better directed at a part of the organization, not boiling the ocean. So you're going to see that on one side. Real-time payments, you're going to continue to see a lot of activity around the world. I think there's 27 different initiatives going on right now, live around the world. Forgive me if I'm a little bit off, but there was a payments report recently that reflected in every region good work that's happening around rail replacement or rail enhancement around real time. But often I ask the question, real time for what and for who? Because if a customer today in the United States uses a Zelle application, they don't know it's not a clearing network. It's a communications network between financial institutions. And often the experience is real time for the end user because they're getting their money instantly. But for the bank, between banks, it's not. I think it's separating the difference that's meaningful. So if a customer says, I need real-time payments, and you deliver it to them via same-day ACH, I think that same-day ACH often satisfies a certain set of use cases that you don't have to go up to the Cadillac, you can get the Honda. I think there's just going to be a better level of maturity. There's going to be a deepening of regulation, regardless of the politics afoot. But I wrote a couple of weeks ago about the fact that this industry is like a series of concentric circles, that we should be talking to each other more about the ecosystem and supporting each other. It's called coopetition. And that there's room for everybody in this industry to bear profits, to make fairly packaged initiatives and programs and solutions here and around the world, and do it in a safe and sound way. Now, the safe and sound way sometimes doesn't get said, but that's the core. No treasurer wants to go with a company that popped up yesterday that doesn't have relationships with a lot of customers. They want something that's tried and true and that's going to execute well for them. And often customers, almost nearly every customer, would pay for that value if you target it properly. So I think there's some things here, they're not new, they're just maturing, and they're going to continue to be out there. So that said, you know that digital assets is something that's quickly maturing for a certain set of use cases, like stablecoins, et cetera. And I think that'll continue to grow. The question is, ultimately, where does it head? I think it heads great places for the right user and the right kind of scenario and use case. It's not for everyone. A good friend of mine, he recently left Visa, could be a CEO of the major fintech, wrote several weeks ago, and I completely agree with him, that on the digital asset side, it's been around for 50 years plus. And you look at me and scratch your head and say, what are you talking about, Alan? Well, he knows what he's talking about. Ruben wrote about airline miles and its connectivity to banks and rebates. That whole arc has been around forever. So only difference is that at the beginning, blockchain, distributed ledger, was chasing the solution versus the solution out there chasing an upgrade or renovation. I think the latter is really where the pool of opportunity is. Give the customers what they want, a better experience, like the telco operators adopting Google several years ago. Think about that. They all didn't want to operate their own app stores and on their own. So they basically got together with Google and said, we're going to develop a platform and we'll differentiate based on our hardware and all the other perquisites on top of the software. That, I think, still is viewed as an industry mark of excellence in terms of efficient use of company resources to shift and change their business model.
So it sounds like there's obviously a lot going on. You got regulations, AI, real-time payments, all of these things. But at the end of the day, it really is just about focusing on the customer and figuring out what's going to work best for them and that experience.
I think that's right. I also think that us as an industry, I said it earlier, should listen more. I know I do. When I talk to a mid-market company, I did a lot of work on mid-market companies when I was at Visa. Often, sometimes the middle market is that forgotten player between small business that's very well understood. But I'm not talking about turnover. I'm talking about the characteristics of a small business up to a certain level. And then what are the characteristics of an enterprise level or large corporate companies in a particular segment? But listening to the needs of a company in an industry, the needs of an automotive company in a particular industry in the mid-market or large corporates, the product will be the same, but understanding how they use it is extremely important. And there's no better compliment that's paid to a client, to a corporate, than really being ensconced in their business and really understanding them and be able to point out to a CFO or to a treasurer where the gaps are without selling. So the point I'm trying to make long-windedly is how we train our salespeople. How do we arm them with the right information to be able to articulate what the institution wants to do is key. Because if you're not communicating it right out the front door, all of your perhaps investments are for naught. So I had the opportunity to roll out a brand new network at Visa, build it and roll it out. We spent a lot of time with relationship teams, senior relationship managers, in articulating what it is, why, how to use it in a way that wasn't on PowerPoint. That was basically a real life simulation of a company and how they would benefit from an experience that allowed them, a financial institution, to be able to provide solutions to their corporate customers that was enhanced, is really full control, end-to-end of that customer experience for high-value payments around the world, which my final point is cross-border. Cross-border payments going to change. And it's not because somebody wants it to change, it's because the competition around cross-border is extremely fierce. And why do you think that's true? Because the biggest part of the revenue pie comes from where? Foreign exchange. So in the foreign exchange business, this is a great opportunity. You get it right, you're going to get it right. If you don't get it right, and a customer goes to a third party or a fintech to get it right, you may still bank them, but you're banking all the basic stuff and you're losing all the gravy on the other side that's going to a fintech, the meaningful revenue. Not only the P times V, but the real rich foreign exchange book of business. So there's a lot from front to middle to back office going on, and plenty to keep everybody busy. But I know this industry really well from over the years, and I have so much respect for it. I know that we'll come out and tackle the next set of challenges and opportunities well. And that's why we do strategic planning. That's not tactical. That's longer term. So I call it rolling back the future, if you will. Like, what are the possible inevitabilities in 12 months, as you asked me, or 5 years or 10 years, and begin to invest in them now. You can't just show up in a year's time and say, I'm here. You have to build to it. And by doing that, you're going to build the culture to win.
Sounds like it's a very exciting time to be in the payment space. Alan, thank you. I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure, Carter. Talk to you soon.
And don't forget to follow Trade Treasury Payments
on your favorite podcast platform.
Thanks for listening.